The night was alive with whispers, shadows, and the coppery scent of blood. The pack had gathered beneath the blood moon, their eyes glittering with anticipation and judgment. She stood at the edge of the ceremonial grounds, shoulders tense, heart pounding in a rhythm that felt almost too loud in the silence between the murmurs. Tonight was supposed to mark her place, her recognition as someone chosen, someone seen. Instead, it had become a nightmare she could not escape. The Alpha King stood at the center, tall, composed, commanding every eye in the hall, yet somehow cold in the way he regarded the scene. Beside him, her rival, his pregnant mistress, was crowned in gold and silver, the banners of the pack fluttering in approval around them. A cheer rose from the crowd, but it felt hollow, jagged, cutting through her like shards of ice. She felt her stomach twist, the world tilting beneath her feet. She had believed, just for a fleeting moment, that she might be chosen, that the bond she had nurtured silently, patiently, through years of obedience, service, and quiet devotion, might be recognized. But the truth was cruel and immediate. She had been nothing more than a shadow, a placeholder, a girl whose worth had been imagined, not real. Whispers and laughter rippled through the crowd. Fingers pointed, voices hissed, and eyes that had once regarded her with polite disregard now glimmered with judgment and ridicule. She was never worthy, someone muttered. Only an illusion of belonging. Every word stabbed at her, yet she could not move, could not protest, could not claim the voice she had been denied for so long. The Alpha's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and final. "She is to leave the pack lands immediately," he declared, tone steady, merciless, commanding obedience rather than asking for it. "Under the blood moon she is exiled. Let no one aid her. She carries nothing but herself." The words fell like stones, each one heavier than the last. Panic and humiliation swirled inside her, threatening to drag her to the ground. But she lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet the cold stares of the pack, forcing herself to remember that she had survived before, and could survive again. Her feet moved on their own, carrying her away from the place she had once called home, through the cold night, past the gates that had symbolized belonging, now only a reminder of rejection. Every step was a battle against despair, every breath a challenge against the lump in her throat that threatened to silence her entirely. The forest loomed ahead, forbidden territory that had been whispered about in warnings and tales. Yet it called to her now, not with fear, but with possibility. Danger lay there, yes, but so did freedom, anonymity, and a chance to reclaim herself from the humiliation that had been thrust upon her. She ran, legs aching, lungs burning, but the urgency of survival outweighed pain. The whispers, the laughter, the accusing eyes faded behind her, replaced by the cold bite of night air and the scent of pine and earth. For the first time, she realized the weight she had carried. Hope, trust, devotion had been a gift given to the wrong world. And now she would carry it for herself. Her hands scraped against rocks and branches as she pressed further into the darkness. The blood moon hung above, red and unyielding, watching her flee with a gaze that was both condemning and solemn. She had been cast aside, declared disposable, humiliated before the very pack she had hoped to serve and protect. Yet even as tears blurred her vision, a small ember of defiance glimmered within her. She would survive. She would endure. And one day, the world that had spat her out would know the strength, the courage, and the fire that had always burned within her. Tonight, though, she ran. Alone. Wounded. Humiliated. And yet alive. The blood moon watched, and she disappeared into the forest, shadows swallowing her form, carrying her away from the only life she had known, and toward the life she would forge for herself. She had fled under the blood moon. And the hunt, she knew, had only just begun. The forest was silent now, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a lone owl. She sank to the ground beneath an ancient oak, knees pulled close to her chest heaving with ragged breaths. The blood moon had faded behind the horizon, leaving only darkness, and the echo of humiliation that had chased her through the night. Her mind wandered unwillingly to the years she had spent in shadows, serving, obeying, and hoping. She remembered the early mornings, polishing the halls, fetching supplies, offering herself in small kindnesses that went unnoticed. Every smile, every small act of loyalty, every whispered prayer for his notice had been a quiet declaration. I am here. Belong. See me. But he had not. Not then. Not when it mattered most. Tears pricked at her eyes as she recalled the moment she had imagined freedom, imagined being claimed, imagined the bond she had dared to hope for. She had believed once, long ago, that she might be chosen, that her lowly status, her silence, her humility, might be enough to reach him. But it had been an illusion, cruelly granted by her own heart and shattered by reality. Her hands dug into the damp earth beneath her, grounding herself against the tide of emotions threatening to drown her. Fear, humiliation, and self-doubt swirled together in a bitter storm. She had been discarded, called disposable, stripped of everything she had ever thought was her right. And yet she was alive. The forest offered no comfort, only shadows and uncertainty. She could not see the path ahead clearly, could not know whether safety lay in one direction or another. And yet, for the first time in years, she realized something that had been whispered to her in dreams but never truly embraced. Her worth was not defined by others. Not by the pack, not by the alpha, not by the cruel hands of fate. A soft whimper drew her attention, and her gaze fell on a wounded fox caught between roots and thorns. Its small body trembled, every breath shallow and pained. Without hesitation, she knelt, whispering gentle words as she eased the creature free. Her hands worked deftly, untangling, cleaning, and comforting. The fox's eyes, wide with fear, gradually softened as her touch steadied it. A small warmth bloomed in her chest, fragile but persistent. Even in exile, even in rejection, even in the shadow of shame, she could still give. She could still heal. She could still be more than the world had ever acknowledged.
Hours passed. Her legs grew stiff, her stomach ached, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders. Yet, somewhere between the ache and the quiet, she felt the first flicker of hope. A strength she had never known she possessed began to settle into her bones. She was not powerless. She was not invisible. She was not broken beyond repair. As dawn began to break, light spilling faintly through the dense canopy, she allowed herself to lean against the tree, eyes closed. Memories of the pack, of the alpha, of all that she had lost and endured, flooded her. And for the first time, she forgave herself for hoping, for loving, for believing she could be chosen. She was more than exile. She was more than shadow. She was herself. The forest around her whispered with the wind, carrying scents of pine, wet earth, and distant water. Somewhere beyond, another creature moved, unseen but aware. And she understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that even in this wild, unwelcoming place, she could survive. She could thrive. She could reclaim the pieces of herself that had been stolen and stitch them into something stronger, brighter, more enduring than before. Her breath steadied. She rose slowly, knees shaky, back straightening as she felt the weight of her own resilience. The world had called her lowly, discarded, invisible. She had been trained to believe she was nothing. But she was everything she had made herself. And the forest, for all its danger and mystery, could not take that from her. She walked on, each step deliberate, each breath steady, carrying herself beyond the border, beyond the fear, beyond the whispers of exile. The path was uncertain. Danger lurked everywhere. And yet, with every step, she felt the fragile, growing power of choice. She had fled under the blood moon. Now, she would survive on her own terms, and one day the world that had turned its back on her would see just who she had become. The halls of the castle were quiet, but not empty. The faint echo of footsteps, the distant rustle of tapestries, and the low hum of the guards' patrols filled the space. He moved through it all with deliberate calm, every motion precise, every gaze controlled. Yet inside, a storm raged, silent, restrained, and relentless. Her absence haunted him. He could not name it aloud, could not allow himself the luxury of regret, not when the pack needed stability, not when an heir had to be secured, not when appearances demanded obedience. Yet her scent lingered in the corridors, faint but impossible to ignore, a reminder of the bond he had denied, the choice he had suppressed. He stood before the throne, hands resting lightly on the polished stone, amber eyes staring at nothing yet seeing everything. The council had praised the decision, the pregnant mistress chosen, the pack stabilized, the illusion of order restored. Yet he could feel the tension beneath the celebration, the quiet disturbance that ran like an undercurrent through his very being. "She is gone," he muttered, almost to himself. "And yet, she lingers." He remembered her face beneath the blood moon, the look of disbelief, hurt, and courage as she fled. Every step she had taken away from the pack lands had been a dagger to his chest, every sound of her fleeing echoed in the hollows of his heart. And yet he had done nothing, could do nothing, because the world demanded it. Because law, politics, and perception had weighed heavier than bond or instinct. The pregnant mistress sensed it, of course. Her presence had grown possessive, subtle yet insistent. She watched him closely, misinterpreting the tension that tightened his shoulders, the rare moments of silence that fell over him like a shroud. She could not know, could not guess, that the alpha's heart, though bound to duty and law, still carried a tether to the woman who had once believed herself chosen. Every night, her absence haunted his dreams. He saw her running through forests, wounded, resilient, unclaimed. Her laughter, soft and hesitant, echoed in the dark corners of his mind. Every memory of her, the silent loyalty, the unacknowledged devotion, the fleeting moments of closeness, clawed at him, leaving a hollow ache that no political success or air could fill. He had told himself it was necessary. For the future. For stability. And yet, in the quiet hours he admitted to a truth no council could sanction, no law could acknowledge. He had let her go because he had been too weak to fight for her when the world demanded obedience. And now she was gone. Completely. The realization hit him harder than he expected. Not anger, not betrayal, just the stark, aching truth that the Omega he had denied, cast aside, and failed to claim had vanished from his life. The halls felt emptier, colder, as if the castle itself mourned her absence. He closed his eyes, drawing in a steadying breath, trying to quell the restless storm inside. His instincts screamed, pulling at him in ways that reason could not control. He could follow her scent, track her in dreams, feel the pulse of the bond stretch thin across miles, but he restrained himself. Not yet. Not until the world's eyes permitted it. Yet a quiet promise settled in the depths of his chest. One day he would see her again. One day he would confront what he had denied, face the bond he had suppressed, and claim what had always been meant to be his. Until then he moved through the halls with controlled steps, but every shadow, every flicker of moonlight, reminded him that the Omega who had fled was still alive, still free, and still tethered to him in ways the world could never sever. The pregnant mistress approached, her voice soft, questioning. "You seem distant tonight." He gave nothing more than a measured nod, amber eyes turning toward the moonlight spilling through the windows. "I am focused," he said evenly, hiding the truth that burned beneath the surface. "That is all." She sensed something but could not name it, could not understand it. She would never understand it. Only he knew, the bond that had been denied, the woman who had fled, the Omega who had claimed a piece of his soul that even duty could not erase. He stood alone in the throne room long after the footsteps had faded, long after the candles had guttered low. The castle was still, the night vast and endless, and he whispered softly into the empty air, "She is gone, but not forgotten." And somewhere, beyond borders and shadows, she lived. And he would find her. The forest beyond the packlands was nothing like home. Every tree seemed taller, every shadow deeper, every sound a potential threat. She moved cautiously, keeping to the underbrush, cloak pulled tight against the chill of early dawn. Her breaths were shallow but steady, heart hammering, yet a small ember of determination burned within her chest. She had fled under the blood moon, cast aside, humiliated, and hunted. And now, she was alone in territory that did not welcome strangers, particularly not a lone Omega, small and unclaimed, vulnerable and, in the eyes of the rival shifters, prey. Hours passed, and the forest grew dense. Her feet were scratched by roots, her skin kissed by thorns, and her stomach ached from hunger, but still she pressed on. Each step was a testament to survival. She had learned, during years of quiet servitude and exile, that resilience was not born of comfort, it was forged in the harshest fires. A soft groan drew her attention. Behind a cluster of ferns, she found a small child, a shifter no older than 10, caught beneath a fallen branch. Its paw was twisted, and it whimpered quietly, eyes wide with pain and fear. She froze, knowing that helping it might draw attention, might reveal her presence to enemies, might put her at risk. Yet something in her could not leave it there. She knelt, whispering soft, calming words, letting her hands work with gentle precision to lift the branch. The child flinched but did not resist. Carefully, she wrapped the injured paw with strips of cloth torn from her cloak, murmuring reassurances. "It's okay. You're safe now," she said softly, letting the words linger in the cold morning air. The child shivered but did not cry, eyes searching hers with tentative trust. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Hope. Perhaps survival did not have to be lonely. Perhaps strength could exist alongside compassion. Perhaps even in the enemy's lands, she could carve a place for herself, even if it was small and fragile. Night fell quickly. She built a small shelter beneath a fallen tree, hiding herself and the child from predators and patrols alike. She shared a small ration of dried berries, murmuring stories in a soft voice that wove courage into the darkness. The child slept against her side, and she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. Exile had taught her to hide, to fear, to distrust, and yet tonight, in this foreign forest, she realized that kindness could be a shield as potent as claws or teeth. She had given safety to another, and in doing so, she had reclaimed a fragment of herself she thought lost forever. But even as she drifted into uneasy sleep, she sensed the fragile line she walked. This land was not her own. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of twig, could announce her presence to enemies who would show no mercy. She had survived exile, but survival here demanded vigilance, cunning, and the constant suppression of fear. Still, she allowed herself a moment of fragile hope. The child stirred, murmuring in sleep, and she brushed a strand of hair from its forehead. For the first time since the blood moon, she felt more than fear. She felt the pulse of life continuing, the quiet strength of her own choices, the faint stirrings of freedom beyond exile. Unknown to her, whispers had begun. Tales of a runaway Omega, moving through the borderlands, aiding the helpless, surviving impossible dangers, had begun to spread. Even in lands where she had no allies, her presence had started to ripple through the currents of rumor and shadow. She did not know it yet, but she was no longer invisible. She pressed the child closer, feeling warmth and fragile trust, and let herself close her eyes for the first time in days. Tomorrow, she would continue moving. Tomorrow she would survive. Tomorrow she would live, on her own terms, in a world that had once cast her aside. The moon rose over the forest canopy, silver and unwavering, illuminating the small shelter and the fragile life within. She had fled under the blood moon. Now, she had found a place to rest, a fragment of safety, and a glimpse of the life she could reclaim, even among enemies, even in exile, even in the shadow of fear. The Alpha King stood in the heart of the Packlands, the air heavy with the scent of pine, earth, and distant rain. His jaw was set, eyes sharp, yet beneath the calm exterior, a storm churned. Orders had been given, search parties dispatched, scouts spread through forests, valleys, and borderlands. Every shifter in the pack knew the command: find the runaway Omega. Ensure her safety, or return her. But the Alpha's mind was elsewhere. Every instinct, every bond, every pulse of his being pulled him toward her. Not merely as a command, not merely as a matter of duty, but with the quiet, unyielding force of something far older, far deeper. Something primal. "She is out there," he murmured, more to himself than to the lieutenant who had approached with reports. "And she knows she is being hunted. That knowledge alone is danger enough." The lieutenant bowed, hesitant. "Shall we increase the search radius, Alpha?" He shook his head slowly, amber eyes closing for a brief moment. "No. Let her run. Let her survive. I will find her. Not just because the pack demands it, but because I must. Inside the pack, the command was interpreted differently. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered she had done wrong, some believed punishment was overdue, others feared the consequences of defiance. Few realized the truth. The Alpha's pursuit was not punishment. It was something quieter, more dangerous, and more binding than any law could dictate. By nightfall, his scouts returned with little but tracks, scent trails that twisted and doubled, disappearing into territories that were treacherous even for seasoned shifters. Yet the Alpha could feel it in his bones, the faint, almost imperceptible pulse of her presence, carried in the wind, the rustle of leaves, and the scent that lingered in dreams. He stood alone on the highest balcony of the castle, moonlight spilling across his shoulders, and allowed himself to breathe deeply. Memories surfaced unbidden, her laughter under the blood moon, the quiet courage in her eyes, the way she had survived exile without breaking. He had let her go once, convinced the pack and law demanded it. But now, each night, each scent, each memory, clawed at him with relentless insistence. She should not be alone, he murmured. Not like this. Not ever again. The pregnant mistress stirred beside him, sensing the tension that even he could not hide. Her hands rested lightly on his arm, possessive, uncertain. She's just a girl, she said softly, though her words carried a quiver of unease. You cannot risk the pack for her. He turned to her, amber eyes steady, commanding, quiet but impossible to defy. She is no girl, he said. And this is no mere risk. She is bound to me in ways the world does not see, and the world does not understand. And whether anyone believes it or not, I will find her. Night deepened, shadows stretching across the castle grounds, yet his gaze remained fixed on the forests beyond. Somewhere she was moving, surviving, hiding. Somewhere she was alive. And every instinct, every memory, every heartbeat screamed that her survival, and their bond, was no longer optional. Dreams carried her to him as well. In the quiet of the night, he could sense her presence in fleeting visions. A flash of golden hair, the arc of her back as she climbed through brush, the flash of determination in eyes that mirrored his own. The bond between them, unbroken even by exile, pulled taut across distance and shadow. I will find her, he whispered into the stillness. Not for law. Not for order. Not for appearances. But because she cannot be abandoned again. Not by me. Not by anyone. The hunt had begun for the pack, official, measured, necessary. But for him, it had transformed into something deeper, a quest driven by instinct, remorse, and the quiet, relentless pull of a bond that refused to be broken. And somewhere, beyond borders and forests, the Omega who had fled under the blood moon ran, weary but unbroken, unaware that the hunter who would not let her go was already on the wind, already closing the distance with patience, precision, and a determination that rivaled death itself. The pack might have called it a search. She might have called it a threat. But for the Alpha, it was inevitable. She could hide, she could flee, she could survive, but she could not escape him forever. The hunt had begun. And he would not rest until she was found. The forest was quiet, save for the soft sigh of the wind through the trees. Moonlight spilled in silvery pools across the ground, illuminating the path like a guide, subtle but relentless. She crouched low beside a stream, leaning against the rough bark of a tree, her body aching from days of running, hiding, and surviving. Every movement sent shocks of pain through her limbs, yet she forced herself to stay alert. Every shadow could be a threat, every sound a predator, or worse, the hunters sent by the pack. She had survived on instinct, wit, and sheer stubbornness. But tonight, exhaustion had finally caught up. She pressed a trembling hand against her side where a jagged branch had grazed her, blood seeping into her clothing. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts, and for the first time in days, fear seeped beneath the surface of her resolve. She was alone. She was vulnerable. And she knew it. A rustle in the underbrush froze her. Muscles tensed, claws unsheathed in her mind, ready for the worst. But then he emerged, silent as shadow, steps measured, eyes scanning, body controlled. Her heart clenched, breath catching, not in fear, but recognition, instinctive, unavoidable. He knelt beside her without a word, amber eyes assessing her wounds with a quiet intensity that made her shiver. She did not speak, she could not. Her voice, raw from crying, from fear, from running, would have betrayed everything she had learned to hide. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, voice low, calm, steady, commanding, but not overbearing. Each word was a tether, invisible but binding, pulling at something deep within her. Her words faltered, unsaid. She wanted to deny him, to push him away, to pretend she could survive without him. But the ache in her side, the cold creeping into her bones, and the raw honesty in his eyes made such lies impossible. He extended a hand, steady and unyielding, but she did not reach for it. Not yet. Instead, he crouched closer, moving with care as if every motion were a promise. He examined the gash, eyes sharp and precise, fingers gentle as he pressed cloth to stop the bleeding. She flinched at his touch, yet could not pull away, because each motion carried an unspoken assurance. She was safe. "You've endured far too much," he murmured, leaning closer so that the faint warmth of his breath brushed her ear. "And yet, here you are. Alive. Still fighting." She swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the ground, trying to steady the tremor in her chest. His presence was overwhelming, not because it demanded, but because it offered. Safety. Protection. A bond that neither time, exile, nor betrayal could sever. Hours passed, though time seemed suspended. He tended to her injuries with care, silence stretching comfortably between them. Words were unnecessary, gestures spoke louder than promises ever could. A gentle touch to her hair, a brush of fingers against her cheek, a hand resting near hers but not forcing connection. Every movement was a reminder that she was seen, valued, and unspoken, but felt, cherished. She watched him in the shadows of the moonlight, the way he moved, the way he measured every action with restraint and precision. Power radiated from him, not in dominance, but in control, calm, and unwavering attention. She realized, with a pang of something she had tried to bury, that he had always been this way. And she had always known it, long before the pack, the exile, and the blood moon. A soft wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of earth, rain, and him, so familiar, so intoxicating, so dangerous. Her pulse quickened despite exhaustion. She wanted to speak, to tell him everything, the hurt, the fear, the longing, but the words lodged in her throat. Instead, she let him simply exist beside her, a steady presence in the chaos of her life. "You've grown stronger," he said finally, voice low, intimate. "More than I imagined. More than anyone saw." She let her head fall back against the tree, eyes closing, trying to absorb the quiet intimacy of the moment without breaking. "I survived," she whispered, almost to herself, "because I had to. Because I had no choice." He did not reply immediately. Instead, he rested a hand near hers again, brushing the tips of his fingers against hers without forcing contact. The unspoken tension between them was electric, filled with restraint, longing, and a dangerous awareness of everything they had denied each other. "You do not need to survive alone anymore," he said at last, amber eyes meeting hers, steady, unwavering, full of something he could not name aloud but she could feel in every pulse, every breath. "I will not let you." Her lips parted, almost to speak, almost to reach, but fear and pride held her still. Yet even in silence, the bond, their bond, spoke louder than words ever could. The moon rose higher, silver and solemn, bearing witness to the fragile reconnection, the quiet acknowledgement of need, trust, and desire that had endured all the trials of exile. Tonight, the Omega was wounded, yes, but not broken. And the Alpha, despite law, duty, and the world's expectations, had finally found her. The forest held its breath around them, shadows and moonlight blending, keeping their secret, and allowing something unspoken but undeniable to blossom, a bond renewed, a slow-burning trust, and the dangerous, thrilling knowledge that this was only the beginning. She had fled under the blood moon. Now she was found. And nothing would ever be the same. The forest felt suddenly colder, as if it too mourned the fragile hope that had taken root. She had believed, just for a fleeting moment, that being found meant safety, connection, even forgiveness. That the Alpha who had silently followed her, who had tended her wounds with quiet care, had come to claim her in a way that law, pack, and exile had denied. But reality arrived like a blade she could not dodge. From the shadows of the clearing, the pregnant mistress appeared, flanked by guards, their presence heavy and unyielding. The Alpha shifted slightly, a subtle tension in his posture, but he said nothing. His amber eyes met hers briefly, flickers of regret, of restraint. But before she could voice the relief, the confrontation, the questions pounding in her chest, words cut through the air like fire. "She is not to be aided," the mistress hissed, voice sharp, carefully controlled, each syllable carrying the weight of authority and false righteousness. "By order of the pack and law, she is a threat. She has manipulated, deceived, and endangered the balance of our lands." She stared, stunned, heart-hammering. Deception? Manipulation? Threat? The words were alien, cruel distortions of the truth she had lived, breathed, and endured. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the warmth she had felt just moments ago with the icy grip of accusation now twisting around her. The guards advanced slightly, and she instinctively stepped back, the wound in her side flaring with pain. She looked to him, desperate, searching for the bond they had shared in silence, for the unspoken reassurance he had offered in the quiet of the moonlit forest. But he remained silent. Amber eyes, steadfast, unreadable, and painfully still. "You promised," she whispered, voice trembling. "You said." He did not finish her sentence. He did not intervene. His jaw tightened imperceptibly, every muscle restrained, every gesture calculated. His silence was louder than any word. And in that silence, she felt the bond snap, not in comfort, not in closeness, but in absence. The pregnant mistress stepped closer, voice venomous yet composed. "He is bound to me. Your presence here, your actions, your survival, none of it changes that. You were never claimed. You were never chosen." Her knees nearly gave way. Years of hope, survival, and secret devotion seemed to collapse in an instant. The warmth of trust, the fragile ember of connection that had blossomed in the forest, flickered and dimmed under the weight of truth she had never wanted to hear. She had been found, yes, but only to be denied, only to be cast aside once more. The guards moved closer, and she stumbled backward, gripping the tree behind her for support. Her mind raced. Escape, fight, flee, survive. Every instinct screamed survival, yet every heartbeat carried the ache of betrayal, the sting of abandonment by the one who had found her when no one else could. Finally, she spoke, voice low, trembling, but with fire beneath the fear. "I am not what you claim me to be. I am not a threat. I am me." The Alpha did not answer. His amber eyes remained locked on hers, a storm of emotions restrained behind a mask of control, regret, longing, desire, restraint. He had found her. He had healed her, protected her, shared silence with her. But in this moment, the world, law, and the false bonds of duty demanded that he step aside. She felt the forest close in around her, shadows pressing from every side. Yet in that darkness, a spark of defiance stirred. She would not be broken again, not by exile, not by accusation, not by betrayal, not by silence. Her legs carried her forward, muscles trembling, breath ragged, body aching, heart shattering, and yet moving, because survival demanded it. She glanced once, fleetingly, at him. The man who had found her, the Alpha who had tended her wounds, the one she had dared to hope for, remained where he stood, silent, restrained, painfully still. And in that glance, 1,000 unspoken truths passed between them. Regret, bond, restraint, the inevitability of the paths they must walk alone, for now. Her flight was deliberate, faster, fueled by pain and anger and betrayal. Every step carried the memory of care she had felt, of hope briefly held, of a bond silently acknowledged yet forcibly denied. The pregnant mistress and guards were distant shadows now, their authority irrelevant to the fire igniting within her. Tears streaked her face, but they did not impede her movement. Her heart throbbed with heartbreak, yes, but also with a rising certainty. She would not remain a pawn, a shadow, a tool. She would survive. She would endure. And one day, the truth, the bond that had never been broken, would have its reckoning. The forest swallowed her again, darkness pressing against her, pain gnawing at her side, yet hope, a quiet, simmering ember, burned still. She had escaped exile once. She would survive betrayal too. And somewhere, beyond the shadows, he remained. Silent. Watching. Bound by law and duty, but tethered still by something far older, far deeper, far more dangerous than the world would ever understand. She had fled once under the blood moon. Now, she fled again, not from exile, but from the lie that had shattered the fragile bond they had begun to reclaim. And the story was far from over. The walls were cold, stone biting into her skin as she was thrust into the dark, narrow cell. Chains clinked as they secured her wrists, heavy and unyielding, a reminder that the world still saw her as a threat or a prize, twisted beyond recognition. She sank to the floor, knees drawn to her chest, heart pounding with exhaustion, rage, and disbelief. How had it come to this? She had survived exile, endured betrayal, and fled again. She had fought through fear, hunger, and the shadows of the forest. And now, she sat in chains, treated as less than human, as though the kindness she had shown, the strength she had cultivated, and the courage she had lived were crimes punishable by imprisonment, or worse. The guards left without a word, leaving her alone with the faint echo of their boots and the distant clamor of a world that did not understand her. Her fingers traced the cold iron of the chains, the weight pressing against her wrists like the judgment of 1,000 eyes. Rumors had already begun to swirl, whispers that she had conspired with enemies, that her compassion was treachery, that her survival was deceit. Every lie stung more than any wound she had endured. She closed her eyes, drawing breath, grounding herself in the quiet moments before despair could claim her entirely. Chains could hold her body, but not her mind, not her spirit, not the ember of defiance that had survived exile and forest dangers. She would endure. She would survive. She would rise. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, deliberate and measured. The Alpha King entered the cell, expression guarded, amber eyes shadowed with a storm she could not name. His presence filled the space, powerful, commanding but restrained. He did not touch the chains, did not speak immediately. He simply observed, and in that silence, 1,000 emotions passed between them, anger, longing, restraint, regret, and a bond that refused to break. "They have sentenced you," he said finally, voice low, steady, controlled. "Execution or sacrifice. They call it law. I call it injustice." She looked up at him, chest rising and falling rapidly, pain and disbelief mirrored in her eyes. "Why?" she whispered, voice hoarse. "Why would they do this to me? I've done nothing wrong." His jaw tightened imperceptibly. Because power fears what it cannot control. Because kindness, courage, and truth threaten lies carefully crafted. And because you exist outside the world's expectation. That alone makes you dangerous. She swallowed, tears threatening again, but pride and defiance held them back. "I am not dangerous," she said quietly, voice steadier than she felt. "I am myself. And I've done nothing that deserves this." He did not reply immediately. Instead, he knelt to her level, eyes holding hers with a quiet intensity that made the air itself seem to still. "I know," he said, "and that is why I cannot leave you here." Her chest tightened, heart skipping with hope and fear all at once. But before she could speak, a commotion outside the cell reminded her of reality. Guards, council members, whispers, accusations, they were closing in, the machinery of punishment relentless. Time was no longer a friend. Every moment was a countdown toward a fate that might be final. He rose, pacing slightly, mind calculating, strategizing. "They will come for you," he murmured. "They will claim authority, enforce law, twist truth. But I will not allow them to succeed. Not with you." Her eyes searched his, desperate for clarity, for promise, for some thread of reassurance. He met her gaze, unflinching, amber fire burning beneath restraint. "Chains can hold the body," he said, voice low, almost intimate. "They cannot hold the bond, the truth, the connection that exists between us. That they do not see it does not mean it is not real." Her fingers clenched the chains again, a mixture of pain and resolve shooting through her. Somehow, amidst the fear and injustice, a flicker of hope began to burn. She had been exiled, hunted, wounded, and betrayed, but here, in the shadow of imprisonment, she realized that she was not alone. Not truly. And he would not abandon her, not to law, not to fear, not to lies. The cell door rattled. Footsteps drew nearer. Shadows lengthened. The world outside sought to crush her, to bend her, to erase her existence as anything but a pawn. Yet inside, the fragile, simmering ember of rebellion and survival burned ever brighter. She rose slowly, chains rattling, body aching, heart defiant. "Then let them come," she whispered, voice trembling yet fierce. "Let them try." He stepped forward, hand close enough to brush hers without touching, a promise unspoken but clear. "I will be here," he said. "Even if they try to take everything from you, I will not let them. Not you. Not the bond. Not what is ours." And in that moment, despite the iron, the shadows, and the looming threat of death, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. The quiet certainty that survival was not just possible, it was inevitable. Chains could hold her wrists. Lies could try to hold her story. But nothing, no law, no pack, no fear, could hold her spirit. Not while he remained. Not while their bond endured. Not while she refused to surrender. The hunt for justice, for truth, and for freedom had only just begun. The air in the council chamber was thick with tension, the scent of burning torches mixing with incense and the faint metallic tang of old bloodlines. The Alpha King stood at the center, shoulders squared, jaw tight, amber eyes scanning the faces of those who claimed authority over law, duty, and order. His gaze was unwavering, calm, yet beneath the surface, every pulse of his being thundered with the storm of decision. "They would see her die," he said, voice low but carrying like steel through the chamber. "For fear, for lies, for power. And I will not allow it." Murmurs rose, whispers of outrage, shock, and disbelief. Counselors shifted uneasily, hands tightening on their carved staffs, eyes darting between one another. To defy the council, to abandon the decree, to risk the realm, it was unthinkable. Yet the Alpha's presence, calm and unyielding, made hesitation impossible. "She is not a threat," he continued, amber gaze blazing. "She is loyal, brave, strong beyond measure. And she belongs not to your laws, but to what is right, to what is just." The room fell into tense silence, save for the crackle of torches. The pregnant mistress stirred, her hands gripping her swollen belly as her eyes darted between him and the council. Fear and disbelief shadowed her features. Her carefully constructed illusion of power trembled in the wake of the Alpha's unflinching authority. Outside, the pack had gathered, sensing the shift in energy, the tension that rippled through the walls of the chamber. Rumors of rebellion and war whispered on the wind, echoing through the valleys and forests beyond the castle gates. Allies and enemies alike waited, watching, calculating, wondering who would bend, who would break, and who would stand. The Alpha's decision was made. He would defy law, abandon false heirs, and confront those who sought to manipulate justice for their own gain. He would face war, not for glory, not for power, not for vengeance, but for her. For the Omega who had survived exile, betrayal, and imprisonment. For the bond that no one else could see, but that he would honor with his every breath. Orders were given. Guards loyal to him prepared for confrontation, alliances were tested, and messengers were dispatched to warn rival territories of the unfolding conflict. Every move was calculated, precise, necessary, but beneath it all, his heart throbbed with fear, with worry, with the knowledge that each choice could cost lives, including hers. He remembered the moments she had endured alone. The forest, the wounded child, the exiled nights under the blood moon. Each memory strengthened his resolve, each image of her resilience sharpened the edge of his determination. She had survived impossibly before. He would not allow death or deceit to claim her now. The pregnant mistress attempted to intercede, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "You cannot risk everything for her," she exclaimed, stepping closer, her facade of control cracking. "Think of the pack, the realm, the law. I have thought of all of it," he interrupted, voice calm but unyielding. "And I have chosen. The pack survives because I defend what is right, not what is convenient. She survives because I will not let injustice claim her. And the laws made by fear and manipulation, will bend to truth or crumble trying." The chamber erupted into argument, counselors shouting, alliances fracturing in real time. The Alpha remained still, amber eyes fixed on the horizon visible through tall windows, where the moon hung low, silver and watchful. Beyond it, the forest stretched, carrying with it the scent of her, the pulse of her survival, and the bond that refused to break. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, crushing, heavy, yet invigorating. Each decision, each command, each measured step toward confrontation was a testament to his devotion, not to power, not to crown, not to appearances, but to her. To the Omega who had endured every cruelty, every betrayal, every shadow of fear, and yet remained unbroken. Messengers came and went, troops assembled, and rival shifters poised for action. The first shots of rebellion had yet to fall, but the tension was palpable, electric, as though the world itself held its breath, waiting to see who would bend, who would break, and who would endure. And in the midst of the storm, he thought only of her, the wounded, brave, unclaimed Omega who had once fled under a blood moon. The woman who had stolen pieces of his heart without asking, who had survived the impossible, and who now needed him to risk everything. He clenched his fists, steadying himself. The cost of love had become blood-deep, but it was a price he would pay without hesitation. Every law, every council decree, every whispered demand for obedience would fall before the truth he would fight to uphold. The first roar of defiance echoed from the castle gates. The war had begun, not for throne, not for crown, but for her. For the bond that had been denied, for the justice that had been stolen, and for the Alpha who would not allow anything to claim her that did not belong. And somewhere, beyond the forest and the shadows, she would feel it, the pulse of his determination, the gravity of his devotion, the inevitability of his presence. He would find her. He would protect her. He would reclaim what had been taken. The Alpha King had never wanted war. But he would wage it anyway, for her. The crowd gathered in the grand amphitheater was restless, murmurs rising and falling like the tide. Torches cast flickering shadows over marble pillars, illuminating faces tense with anticipation, fear, and curiosity. She was brought forward, chains still binding her wrists, yet her posture was unbroken. Head held high, eyes steady, she walked with the quiet courage of someone who had endured impossible trials and refused to be broken. The council had declared this a trial, a reckoning, a ceremony to cement law and order. But beneath the pomp and protocol, the truth pulsed like a heartbeat waiting to be heard. She had been painted as a traitor, a manipulator, a danger. And the world was poised to see her as they wished, to bend reality to suits, decrees, and whispers. But she carried a secret no one had anticipated. A truth that had lain dormant, hidden, unclaimed, waiting for the moment it could no longer be silenced. The Alpha King stepped forward, his presence commanding yet tempered by restraint. Amber eyes scanned the crowd, taking in every reaction, every twitch of unease, every shadow of doubt. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he waited, letting the silence stretch, letting tension rise until it became almost unbearable. "Enough," he said at last, voice low, steady, carrying across the amphitheater like the weight of inevitability. The crowd hushed, torches flickering against the stillness. Enough of lies. Enough of fear. Enough of shadows masquerading as truth. She met his gaze, her own amber eyes reflecting the same fire, the same bond, the same unyielding recognition. No words were needed between them. In the silence, they acknowledged the tether that had never been broken, the quiet, dangerous, undeniable bond that law, exile, and betrayal could not sever. He stepped closer, the world narrowing to the space between them, to the moment where truth would rise and shadows would fall. "She is not what they claim," he said, voice carrying both authority and reverence. "She is more than a pawn. More than a shadow. She is the heir they never saw, the Omega chosen before all, bound by fate, blood, and bond to this realm in ways you cannot deny." Gasps rose from the crowd. Whispers erupted. The pregnant mistress paled, clutching her belly, her carefully constructed image of power crumbling under the weight of revelation. The council shifted uneasily, realizing that the laws they had invoked, the sentences they had decreed, were meaningless in the face of truth. She lifted her chin, chains rattling softly, and spoke, voice clear, steady, resonant with power she had never claimed before but had always carried. "I am she. I am the one born to endure, to survive, to reclaim what has been stolen. I am not a shadow, not a pawn, not an afterthought. The bond, the heir, the truth." The amphitheater fell into stunned silence, the weight of her words pressing like gravity. The crowd had come to witness her fall, to see her broken, to affirm their judgments. Instead, they witnessed awakening, courage, and undeniable power. The Alpha King stepped forward, kneeling before her, not as ruler, not as sovereign, but as mate, protector, and equal. "I have been bound to her from the beginning," he said, voice rich with authority and restraint. "And none shall deny what is real, what is rightful, or what is ours. She is chosen before all. She is mine, and mine to protect, to honor, to stand beside, not beneath, not after, but always." The crowd gasped again, shock and awe rippling through the amphitheater. The pregnant mistress faltered, her mask of composure cracking as the truth illuminated every falsehood she had woven. The council scrambled, murmurs turning to panic, as centuries of law, tradition, and manipulation collided with the unyielding force of destiny. She felt the chains fall away, figuratively if not yet physically, as recognition, truth, and bond swept through the air. The power she had never fully claimed surged through her, not as arrogance or cruelty, but as rightful authority, courage, and presence. Every injustice she had endured, every exile, every betrayal, had led to this moment. And she stood, unbroken, luminous, undeniable. The Alpha reached for her hand, amber eyes meeting hers, a silent promise that extended beyond law, beyond fear, beyond everything the world had tried to dictate. "Together," he said, voice low, resonant, and unwavering. "We are stronger than the lies, stronger than exile, stronger than fear. Together we claim what is ours." And in that moment, the moon above, full, bright, silver, and eternal, seemed to pulse in recognition, bathing them in light that reflected both power and bond. The amphitheater, the council, the pack, even the rival shifters who had watched from afar, all bore witness. The Omega who had fled, survived, and endured was no longer hidden. She was chosen. She was revealed. She was unstoppable. Chains of fear, exile, and lies could no longer bind her. The world had attempted to silence her, to erase her, to deny her truth. But now, in the heart of all who watched, her voice, her presence, and her bond rang clear. And the Alpha King, kneeling before her, allowed the world to see what had always been undeniable. She was his. She was theirs. And nothing, no law, no fear, no deception, could ever take that away. The moon hung high, silver and approving, as the crowd fell silent, awestruck, as the Omega who had once fled under the blood moon claimed her place, not as victim, not as shadow, not as exile, but as queen, mate, and unyielding force of truth. The story had shifted. The bond had been revealed. The world would never be the same. The amphitheater had never been so still. The air trembled with anticipation, the weight of truth heavy upon every heart present. She stood at the center, no longer chained, no longer hunted, no longer hidden. Every scar, every wound, every trial she had endured shimmered in the silver light of the moon, marking her not as fragile, but as sovereign. The Alpha King stepped forward, not with ceremony, but with deliberate purpose. Amber eyes locked on hers, a quiet fire burning within them. The crowd watched, spellbound, as he moved, not as ruler, but as mate, protector, and witness to the truth that had long been denied. "This ends now," he said, voice carrying effortlessly across the amphitheater. "No law, no counsel, no fear, and no false heir shall claim what is ours. She is chosen before all, and the world will recognize it. Not tomorrow, not later, but here and now." Gasps swept through the crowd. Whispers grew frantic, but the Alpha's presence demanded silence. Every step he took toward her was a statement. Power tempered by devotion, authority tempered by love, restraint tempered by inevitability. He reached her side and knelt, letting the motion speak for the words the world had tried to deny. The pregnant mistress had fallen silent, her posture crumbling as the Alpha's loyalty and devotion were laid bare for all to see. Even the council, steeped in centuries of tradition and rigid authority, faltered under the weight of truth and justice. He lifted her hand gently, reverently, his amber eyes never leaving hers. "Do you accept this?" he asked softly, "not as law, not as obligation, but as choice?" She felt her heart swell. Every trial, every betrayal, every lonely night and desperate flight had led to this. She drew in a steadying breath, voice quiet but unwavering. "I do," she said, and the simplicity of the words carried more power than any decree, more truth than any law. The Alpha smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that spoke of relief, pride, and a depth of devotion that words could scarcely convey. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle, deliberate kiss to her knuckles, a symbol not of possession, but of recognition, respect, and equality. The crowd erupted, not in violence, but in awe. Pack members, counselors, and witnesses all saw what had always been invisible yet undeniable. She was no longer exile, no longer pawn, no longer shadow. She was claimed, not by fear, not by law, but by truth, love, and bond. He straightened, still holding her hand, and addressed the crowd once more. "Let it be known, from this day forth, she is not only my mate, but my equal. She is no longer hidden, no longer discarded, no longer silenced. The laws that allowed her suffering are changed, and the pack shall honor the bond that cannot be broken." A hush fell again, heavier than before, as the reality of his words sank in. The pregnant mistress shrank back, powerless in the face of the undeniable bond and public declaration. Allies shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the tide had turned, and no manipulation could undo the truth now laid bare. She felt the moonlight wash over her, silver and approving as she met his gaze. The world beyond their bond had been hostile, cruel, and unrelenting. But here now she was seen. She was recognized. She was chosen, not because the world had decreed it, but because it had always been her truth. He led her to the front of the amphitheater, letting every member of the pack, every counselor, and every witness see her, not as a victim, not as a pawn, not as a shadow, but as a queen, as a mate, as a force of justice realized. "From this day forward," he said, voice strong, unwavering, "she shall be honored, protected, and empowered. Not because law demands it, but because she has earned it. Not because of fear, but because of truth. Not as exile, but as queen, mate, and equal in every sense that matters." She stood taller, chest lifted, gaze steady. The world could no longer diminish her, could no longer dictate her worth. She had fled under the blood moon, endured betrayal, survived exile, and faced chains meant to break her spirit. Now, she was whole, recognized, and publicly claimed, not as shadow, not as pawn, but as chosen before all. The Alpha knelt once more, placing a hand over his heart, then hers, a silent, binding gesture that carried centuries of devotion, sacrifice, and inevitability. The moon above seemed to respond, silver light cascading over them as though blessing the claim, sealing the bond, and announcing to all that she was his, and he was hers. And in that moment, amidst the awestruck faces, the broken laws, and the tremors of a pack witnessing something extraordinary, she realized the truth. Justice is not vengeance, and recognition is more powerful than exile. She had been given her choice, her power, and her voice. And she would never surrender them again. The crowd watched as the Alpha and his chosen Omega stood side by side, bonded publicly, recognized fully, and undeniable. She had been hunted, betrayed, and imprisoned, yet she emerged triumphant, not through force, not through manipulation, but through truth, endurance, and the unbreakable bond that had existed long before anyone else could see it. She was chosen. Before all. And nothing could ever take that away. The castle gardens were quiet under the silver glow of the moon, the air fragrant with night-blooming flowers and the faint rustle of leaves whispering in the gentle wind. She walked along the stone paths, barefoot, feeling the cool earth beneath her feet, letting the serenity of the night seep into every ache, every scar, every tremor of her heart. For the first time in years, she felt unburdened, not hunted, not betrayed, not exiled, but whole. The chains of the past, the blood moon exiles, the lies and betrayals, had all fallen away. She breathed deeply, savoring the stillness, the freedom, and the quiet triumph of endurance. Each step was a testament to survival, to courage, to a journey that had begun in fear and ended in recognition. The Alpha King approached from the shadows, silent as always, yet every step carried warmth and reassurance. His amber eyes softened as they met hers, filled not with command, but with partnership, respect, and the deep, abiding bond they had forged through trials untold. "You walk as if the weight of the world has lifted," he said softly, voice low, rhythmic, carrying the calm authority that had once been both terrifying and comforting. "I suppose," she replied, lips curling in a faint, serene smile, "that it has. Or perhaps I have learned to carry it differently. Not on my shoulders alone, but with you beside me." He came to stand beside her, hands brushing lightly against hers, a silent acknowledgement of choice, equality, and trust. The bond that had survived exile, betrayal, chains, and war now rested between them, quiet but unbreakable, a tether forged in fire and moonlight. "The pack watches us," he murmured, voice quiet enough for only her to hear. "They will learn. Some will resist. Others will follow. But they will never deny what they see tonight. You are no longer the girl who fled. You are their queen." She tilted her head, eyes reflecting the soft silver glow above. "Queen," she whispered, savoring the word, tasting its power, its justice, its promise. "I never thought I would reach this point. I feared I would always run." He shook his head gently. "You ran to survive. You endured to exist. And now you reign, not as shadow, not as pawn, not as exile, but as the woman you were always meant to become. The Omega who was never meant to be hidden. The mate who was always chosen." Her heart swelled, and a quiet, contented tear traced her cheek. She realized that healing was not a single act, but a journey. Every betrayal, every flight, every wound had taught her resilience, strength, and the unshakable value of truth. And now she could choose not only how to live, but who to become, with no fear of running, hiding, or being denied again. He guided her to a small balcony overlooking the moonlit courtyard. The pack moved below, watching, learning, witnessing the transformation. Amber eyes met hers again, and in that gaze she felt the centuries of expectation, exile, and injustice melt away, replaced with recognition, devotion, and a promise renewed every day. She would never be alone, never be diminished, never be silenced. "Do you feel it?" he asked softly. "The peace that comes after storms? The quiet that follows battle?" She inhaled deeply, letting the night wind fill her lungs and soul. "I do," she said, voice steady. "And it is brighter than I ever imagined." He took her hand fully, holding it gently, deliberately, letting the connection linger, a silent affirmation of equality, choice, and love. "Free," he echoed. "And together we will guide them, protect them, and honor what we have built. Not with fear, but with justice, respect, and bond." For a long moment, they simply stood there, two souls bound by trials, triumphs, and the undeniable truth of their connection. The moon hung overhead, silver and eternal, bathing them in light that reflected not just survival, but the fulfillment of destiny, trust, and love. The gardens seemed to breathe with them, the flowers bowing gently in the night breeze, the stars glimmering like distant witnesses to the quiet triumph of a queen who had once fled. She no longer ran. She reigned. And he, the alpha who had hunted, protected, and waited, now stood beside her, not above, not claiming, but choosing daily to honor, protect, and love the woman she had become. She smiled, a full, serene, powerful smile. "No chains," she whispered. "No fear." He returned her smile, amber eyes reflecting the same peace, the same devotion. "Just this," he agreed. The night stretched on, quiet, serene, and fairy-tale-like. The Omega who had fled under a blood moon had found not only her place, but her power, her bond, and her home. And in the silver glow of the moon, side by side, they faced the future together. She no longer ran. She reigned.